Have you done any experimentation planting into green cover crop and leaving it green and not destroying it?
Is this thing working? Yeah. Me personally, the only time we've done that was we've used some relay cropping systems where we've planted winter wheat in the fall, first week of October, and then we left that sit through the winter, and in early May come in and just used a conventional drill, not a no-till drill, but a conventional drill, and drilled soybeans into the standing wheat, and then come back and harvested the wheat over the top of the soybeans, and then come back and harvested the beans after that. That system works very well as long as you have enough moisture. It's a very moisture-dependent system, keeping in mind that the wheat's there first, it's well established, has a good root system. If there's a lack of moisture, the beans aren't going to grow. And then it just becomes a wheat field, and you lost the seed and the cost of driving over the field with the grain drill. So it's somewhat minimal risk, but you could lose those beans. But if you have enough moisture, what we're trying to do with that system is take advantage of the fact that the wheat begins to senesce and dry down at the same time the beans are coming on, and the beans will take a fair amount of harvest traffic. We've talked about that several times today, how the beans are relatively plastic and they'll absorb that. They'll even take a fair bit of laceration from the wheat harvest. It's not a system to use if you're trying to bale straw. You would have to wait until after you harvest the soybeans because you still have that straw standing out in the field with beans in it. You combine all that with the beans, and of course the dry straw goes right through with the bean plant, not a problem. And then you could bale that material that's left over at the end, which be a mixture of soybean stubble and wheat stubble, or wheat straw. The straw is not going to be very bright. If you like to sell bright, clean straw, like into the dairy industry or something, or horse people may not like it, but if you're bedding your own animals on it, it's perfectly fine. And that system's worked, but it only works if you have enough moisture. So we'll use it on bottomland quite successfully.
That would be the best example that I would be able to give too. I mean, I don't know if anyone, and someone told me this recently, this actually surprised me that they were, regrowth is an issue, and regrowth is definitely an issue in the system if you're doing a wheat crop afterwards. Although honestly, in Wisconsin, to do a wheat crop after, but I suppose it could be an oat crop as well, after this system is hard because as Leah showed, we can't get these beans off typically. Everything's a little bit late, so we're typically not getting the beans done until the third week of October. So for us to come in and do wheat after that's difficult. But folks in Indiana and Illinois, I've definitely heard real issues with doing a wheat crop after a rolled soybean field because there can be issues with contamination and regrowth. Especially with some of the early planting systems. And I think, Leah showed some issues with the drill in early planting, with regrowth more so than the planter, but it's every time you go through, and just like we were talking about with like strategy with the vetch and the plant just wanting to reproduce, that when you go through an early plant and when that planter damages the rye, it stimulates more regrowth because that plant wants to reproduce and it experiences the damage and it sends up more tillers to try to get viable seed. So the drill, you have more units going over the field, so it doesn't surprise me that you have more regrowth in that system because you have more damage. So any of these systems that I think you have a risk like planting, not terminating the cover crop, you have a risk of regrowth and seed contaminating the next crop, which someone told me, which again shocked me, that they were docked or had issues and had to clean the soybean seed. And so they had contamination of the soybean seed at the elevator that they were sent back with. So unless you have really good cleaning equipment, it's just something to consider what these tolerances are. And really, I think it's just so critically important to try to keep any viable seed from getting on the ground. And that's one of the reasons why we tried triticale. There were two different reasons. One, because triticale tends to put on more aggressive growth early in the spring. So we thought that, especially with maybe a later planting date, we could still suppress early weeds or get better biomass. The other thing with triticale versus rye, like I've mentioned a couple times, rye kind of has that same issue with hard seed, is that it won't just germinate all in the single year. So you're going to have more risk of regrowth if you have viable seed on the ground. Triticale, and Leah saw this in the field too. Triticale, if the seed is viable because it's not all terminated and falls on the ground, it kind of germinates right away in that same year. So it looks like a lawn, but at least all the seeds germinated. So I worry about any situation where you can get viable seed, but like Jeff's describing, and there was a farmer with us last night at the table discussing, Jeff, who also did a great example of this system with modified equipment. This relay cropping system is a possibility, but it's not without its risks either. Wisconsin, I know you guys in the East Coast have had much more issues with drought than we have in the last few years. We've had more rain than we need, so we haven't had that competition issue, but I can definitely see that be a problem. But the relay cropping between wheat and soybean is a way to kind of accomplish this no-till strategy, but still getting 2 crops and not have to terminate it. Okay, there's a question over here.
I've heard of conventional no-tillers having a lot of success with a rye cover crop followed by corn, and especially in the South, like the rye gets really huge and is very mature, and they are using a couple more species mixed in with the rye cover crop, and you know, they have soluble fertilizers sometimes, but I'm kind of confused why that works and organic no-till corn into rye is such a no-go.
Well, and Jeff, you can give your opinion too. So I think it comes down to just the pure amount of high amounts of residue and high seed-end ratio. So my experience, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not as familiar with conventional systems. So I think the conventional no-till with rye into corn, they're using a herbicide to terminate that rye fairly soon. So it's almost, it's still very vegetative when they do it. And they may be, I mean, they're planting corn pretty early. So first, I mean, they're not having the amount of biomass, so that the more biomass, the more the microbes have to tie up the end to break down that biomass, because they're going to use that biomass. So is an aspect of biomass potentially, as well as the fact we're letting the rye get so mature, we're going to increase the seed-end ratio. So the browner it gets, the more nitrogen the microbes have to pull to the soil to break down that carbon. And that's what they're going to try to do, because that's what's going to make them happy for food. So how this works in conventional, and not only that, they have the soluble mineral nitrogen that they're putting on there to feed the corn crop. So that would be my guess, the factors of they're terminating it earlier at a vegetative stage, so it's a lower seed-end ratio, just lower biomass overall, because it's not just the top growth that we're talking about, it's the below-ground root matter. And the microbes are eating that below-ground root matter, and there's a lot of roots when the rye gets this tall. Jeff, any thoughts from the audience as well?
Yes. She's right. Those are the reasons. They're completely different systems, and they function completely differently. Yeah.
Question for Leah and Erin. What is the main source or multiple sources of your loss of population relative to seed drop with the soybeans in the no-till system?
Why we're seeing, and this is where, and when I saw those populations that Leah showed, even down from 225, I was like, wow, if we're getting up to 150, that's super. I think it's a combination of, the soybeans having to make it through we just had such wet springs and very cold springs, although 2017 was better than last year. The soybean, there is a certain amount of soybean that rots in the ground, I think. This is my projections. Some of it is because of the hairpinning issues and just not getting the seed in the ground. I read some research study that soybean, as long as about 30% of the surface of a soybean seed is exposed to moisture, it will germinate. So even if the seed is somewhat in the ground, or if you have an open planting furrow, it actually will germinate. But definitely you're going to have a better environment if it closes. So some of it's due to planting. I do wonder how much of it may be due to issues that we just haven't quantified yet, if there are slug or other predation issues happening underneath the mulch that we're just not quantifying yet. But that does worry me at all. I don't think that we've had an issue with armyworms, although certainly I know others have. Although we have had one year where we did have to spray for armyworms, which I don't know if it actually did any good, but I was just so scared after lifting up the mulch and seeing the level of worms underneath there that we did spray. I think it was BT and Trust. But I think it's, seed in the ground, perhaps a cold, wet environment, but I do think there could be other predation issues that we're not quantifying. Any other thoughts about stand count?
Jeff, what other legumes are you looking at besides hairy vetch in the no-till the corn into? I'm a little nervous about hairy vetch becoming a weed in the field.
Well, we've looked at a lot of different things. I would say that nothing has compared in terms of its ability to fix nitrogen that hairy vetch does. A lot of our systems, we're not using animals in the system, so we are prevented because of the research needs from using manure, and so we depend heavily on our legumes to supply most, if not all, of the nitrogen to the entire system. Hairy vetch in a average year will produce 200 pounds of nitrogen, in a really good year 300 pounds. So we can get a lot of nitrogen out of that one cover crop in the rotation. So we focused our energy on that. We've worked with crimson clover, which you heard Erin mention earlier today. Crimson clover, you know, I think it would survive here just fine if you had snow. If you don't have snow and you get something below zero with a little bit of wind, goodbye crimson clover. It just won't make it. We've worked with Austrian winter pea, you heard of that earlier, field peas, the spring planted field peas, nitro alfalfa, an annual alfalfa, we've worked with that. Yeah, that's probably about it for the legumes. You know, a lot of people want to say, you know, because medium red clover is so cheap, could we do that? But you just can't kill it with a roller. You know, the bottom line is if you can't kill it walking on it with golf shoes, you're not going to kill it with a roller. It's not magic, but, you know, buckwheat, we roll buckwheat. I'd really like to start doing a lot more work with barley. We haven't talked about barley at all. We've worked with barley at the Institute, but most of the they don't produce enough biomass. They're specifically bred to be short, and that's because the old barley varieties that they had 100 years ago were very tall, put on more biomass than rye, but they tended to lodge very quickly. So they bred it for a short, stiff straw. I'd like to go back and get some of those older barley varieties and start working on that because I don't care if it lodges, I'm going to knock it down anyway. They don't produce near as much viable seed, but then again, that's good for me. You know, I just want the leaf material in the stem, so we're going to start looking more at some of those old barley varieties if I can find them. There's some breeders in Washington State that I think are going to supply us with some seed.
Yeah, I've got two questions. One, I saw a presentation by, I think his name is Jan Hendricks, a German researcher, and he'd taken the I&J roller and had beveled the edges to make it more aggressive and was seeing some improvement in terms of their ability to terminate some of the tough-to-kill legumes. I wondered if you've ever tried that, one. And two, you mentioned earlier post-emerge rolling of corn. And I want to think last year there was a presentation here that showed that was kind of a disaster. So I'd like to hear more about your experiences with that and specifically what timings and how, in relation to the growth stage of the corn, can you get by with that?
Okay, two totally diverse questions. The first is what Jan's doing, and Jan came to Rodale early on and is using that system in Germany. We have not tried it with sharpened blades. We did do some work early on before I designed that roller using a buffalo stalk chopper that does have sharpened blades, and I found it to be too aggressive and chopped things up, and once I chopped it up, I couldn't plant into it because it just drags it around the field. And so I got away from that. I'm not saying it couldn't work, but then again, killing vetch for the most part hasn't been a big problem for me. And if it is, you know, it's kind of funny because what we've seen is when you go through and roll it and you have your planter mechanism going through and your tractor tires, because we're doing it all in one pass, right where you cut the slot into the vetch and get the corn seed in the ground, it starts to turn brown and die almost within minutes of where you cut it. And that dead zone kind of spreads out from that cut area till it's about 4 or 5 inches wide on either side of the corn plant. And if there is any vetch that's going to live, it's in between the plants. And so as ridiculous as this sounds, there's been times when we've just driven through the field with a tractor, just drive on it a second time. Because you're between the rows, you look like an idiot driving through the field with nothing on the tractor. but you know, you can fly. You can go 11 miles an hour just down the rows and turn around and come back and just drive on it and squash it, and that kills it. So that was kind of our thought, well, what if we crimped it a second time? And so we've tried that, and, you know, it seemed to work. And it didn't hurt the corn at all, because as long as the growing tip's in the ground, you can beat corn up severely, and it just grows right back. So that's worked too. Now, whether it was the roller doing the work or the fact that we drove on it a second time with the tractor, keep in mind on research plots, we're only using 4-row equipment. So you have a lot of tire traffic proportionally to the width of your equipment. If you were doing, you know, 12 rows or 30-row equipment, you're not going to have that. So there's a lot more work to be done, a lot more work.
So that, just to go with our experience with our crazy idea of trying to crimp over corn. So after we had the success with soybeans, just like Jeff was saying with the growing people in the ground, I'm like, why can't we do the same with corn? And we can push the planting date earlier with corn. And as long as, I mean, the growing point of corn stays under the ground for quite a while. And I was hearing stories and reading reports, if you get hail damage fairly early, and even though it seems like the corn plant defoliates, it can still actually grow and yield decently because the growing point's protected under the ground. So could we plant early, and just like we do with soybeans, as long as that growing point's under the ground, crimp the cover crop later, and then if anything, the corn might have a jump. Didn't work out that way. We did do spring-seeded cover crops on this one, so we tried just a spring-seeded field pea, I think that was the year we used chickling vetch as well, but we got a disastrous stand. But interestingly, we had a weird pattern that I don't know if we ever discerned. Leah, I don't know if you can describe more of what we saw. It was like some rows we had awesome corn, and then some rows we didn't. And I don't know if we ever figured that out. And I don't know where Leah just went off to.
Here. Yeah, we never figured it out, but we had that pattern. I don't remember if it was on the edges of the roller crimper. We had a normal stand of corn, and in the center we had a poor stand of corn. But some rows where we had like all the stand was there, and some rows everything was dead.
So if it had to do with the pressure, or I mean, it was something that was intriguing because it's like, this, what was it? It would have been like 30% of the rows looked awesome, but 60
Looked awful.
Yeah, it looked awful. But I mean, there were some rows that looked really good by doing that. And what was it about the rows that looked good that the corn seemed to be able to survive through it and keep growing? Never figured it out, but.
My question, when we start to talk about getting good establishment of cover crops in the late summer and fall, we start to bump up against that Hessian fly date. And I'm just wondering, is that a relevant risk, or how do you perceive that risk? Is that something you take into consideration, or do the benefits kind of outweigh the costs?
I've never even considered it, honestly.
I would say we considered it, but we've not had or seen any issues on rye with that. I think you would if you planted wheat earlier, but we haven't seen it, the Hessian fly, in rye at all. I don't know if it is an issue in rye. I know it can be and is in wheat, but we've not seen it in rye.
And I've had people ask me, and I think this is that is really, really early, even better. And I would say no, that planting at the end of July or even earlier into August, you're not necessarily going to get an advantage and potentially even could have more issues. So it's one of those things where pushing more isn't always better, but definitely late you're going to see an issue. I think early you might have more growth and you might have more issues with winter molds, and there may actually be more damage to the crop. So there is a sweet spot with planting.
Jeff, have you considered common vetch, or does it do as much good nitrogen fixation wise as hairy vetch and doesn't have the hard seed issues? And another question then, you mentioned wheat in the rotation where you're putting hairy vetch in ahead of corn. How are you adding supplemental nitrogen to that through poultry litter or something, or is your soil health good enough that you're not needing to add extra nitrogen for that wheat crop?
Okay, again, two questions. The one about common vetch. I don't have a lot of experience with common vetch. It does not, with the little experience I do have with it is that it doesn't fix as much nitrogen as hairy vetch, and it's a little harder to kill. It doesn't have the hard seed, but it is a little harder to kill, more like chickling vetch is tough to kill, and hairy vetch is hard enough in some cases. The second part of your question was nitrogen, because we do put small grains in our system. What we've sort of, I'm a slow learner. It takes me a while to pick up on some things. And it used to be we'd always put all of our soil amendments into the field right ahead of corn. As organic farmers, we do tillage, and so you're trying to get compost or manure applied. Maybe you have alfalfa there. You're trying to do all these things. You got to get lime on the field. You got to get all this done before you can plant your crop. And then, one day it just dawned on me, like, why am I killing myself in spring? If the goal is to feed the health of the soil, and the soil functions and eats and manages water 12 months out of the year, I could put this stuff on anywhere in the rotation, and it would be a benefit to the soil. I'm trying to feed the soil and grow cover crops. The heck with corn. The heck with soybeans. If I take care of the soil, it's going to grow corn and soybeans, and it's going to do just fine. And so now we apply all of our soil amendments, I don't care what it is, if it's manure, if it's lime, if it's compost, if it's, you name it, we put it on in the summer. It's done two things for us. One, because we're a research farm, we have a lot of student interns. Student interns all want to drive tractors and run machinery, and they all suck at it. I just had one of our scientists the other day said, because I mentioned we're looking for a farm manager, our farm manager resigned, and he said, oh good, now can I drive tractors in my own plots? And I said, no. He said, why? It's like, because you suck at it, and you're going to wreck it. So anyway, there's an opportunity that we can put interns out in the field. They can spread compost, they can spread manure, they can't mess up too much, and they don't have to drive straight, so it's good for them. And it's a time of the year when we have time. In the grain business, July, August, end of July, early August, you have a little bit of a window of opportunity. You want to get a lime truck in July, boy, they're sitting by the phone waiting for you. Try to get them in late April, early May. Unless you signed up a long time ago or a big customer, they're not going to come. So we have plenty of time to get all those materials into the soil, feed the soil. And if we do have to put manure in this system, I'll put it in there. Let the wheat use some of it, because if I'm using vetch, there's plenty for the corn. It's like putting money in the bank. I'm just putting it in the bank. Put it in the bank, put it in the bank. When there's time to take some out, I'll take it out. Because it's not like the soluble fertilizers that our conventional neighbors are using, which is kind of a put and take system. You put it in and take it out. If you don't take it out, it's gone. It's either volatilized or leached out of the system. The organic sources aren't quite like that, so we have a lot more flexibility, and we just keep feeding the bank, and then what we're mineralizing, we just, like I said, we did some work with the USDA where they came to the farm and they said, look, there's a problem with your data. You're getting 180 bushel corn on 100 units of nitrogen. Yeah, you can't do that. And then they start looking at the system, they go, oh, well, yeah, you can. Because the efficiency of the system, the biological efficiencies, and the way you're putting it into the system, it can work. And so it seems to be working for us.
But you're not necessarily feeding wheat right ahead of it or during?
I'm not deliberately trying to feed wheat, because if you feed it too much, it's just going to lodge on you anyway and fall down, and I don't want that. And again,
you're
it seems
not
to be
concerned
plenty.
about the microbes eating up the nitrogen source you've got there?
Well, I think they're eating some, but then they're releasing it. They don't steal it, they just use it. They're borrowing it, and I got to feed them too. So, but again, you're always feeding them, and they're always eating, and they're always releasing, and that's why these systems, once they go through the transition process, it just gets better and better every year. The system gets easier and easier every year. So I would say I have a much easier time doing it than I did 40 years ago. But when I started, our soil organic matter content on that farm was around 1.7 average, and now we're closer to 5.7. And so life just gets easier as your soil gets healthier. And unfortunately, in the conventional world, it's going the other way, and it's getting less and less healthy, and they're having a harder and harder time, and I understand that. That just makes perfect sense. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. 2018 was our first year of trying roller crimping, and bought it's a Mandaco prototype. Basically, they took a land roller and welded crimper bars on it in a Chevron design. Used it and subsequently returned it because there was a lot of things that were fundamentally flawed about it. But one of the things I noticed, and it really hasn't been discussed, like last year when we were here, was we've got flat fields, But what you don't realize is even with those flat fields, any slight deviation from prior traffic, that stuff will just roll right over that. And so you're trying to crimp from every which way you can to try to get it. And so I was wondering what challenges and what you guys have dealt with that kind of thing, a little detail thing you really don't think about, so.
Yeah, well, I think we should be willing to pass the microphone around because there's going to be a lot of other experiences like Mark.
Mark, do you have any experience? Because he's doing larger land acres too. I think we're just doing small.
Yeah,
we have a 15.
obviously the soil's the anvil, the roller's the hammer. If the hammer doesn't touch the anvil, it ain't going to crimp the thing. So you got to have fields that are at least across the width of your roller pretty flat and level. I mean, the field can undulate, but you hit a rock the size of a football and it bounces up in the air. You didn't touch the ground at all there. And you're not going to crimp that. That's absolutely correct. And so it takes some forward planning and thinking about what you're doing in terms of if you did do tillage in the system, you got to get that field flat. I mean, it's the same with, you get these high-speed balers that come through and bale hay. They don't like when your field's rough and bouncy and they go flying all over the place. I've had some fields where they said, no, we're not coming in there and baling again until you flatten that out. They were on some rented ground that had been prepped before us, and yeah, it was rough and rocky. So yeah, it's got to be nice and smooth. You got to do your homework and get everything prepped right. Like painting a house, if you do lousy prep work, the paint doesn't stick. Yeah, that's the way it works. But Mark.
We have a right-way roller that's similar. It's between a Cullipacker and a true, crimper. And we run that in the fall as we're planting our cereal rye. So it's much like a land roller and gets everything pre-leveled. And then in the spring, it's easier to get that contact.
And I wonder how much that looking at more of a unit like the Dawn model that's over there might be able to deal with like that better because you have potentially more flexibility in terms of dealing with more variability through the field versus especially as you get larger and larger width rollers to try to deal with that even down pressure across that very wide unit.
Yeah, that one really interests me. I think you really got something good there. I worry though, it might turn into a dump rig if you're trying to do like nets or something.
Yeah, well, definitely something that we can look at.
Next question, can we go to a land roller in Wisconsin or, a crimper followed by a weed zapper in zones and then plant into that zone if we're having a difficult time, killing our vetch, if vetch is our #1 nitrogen maker? What can we do with the resurgence of, the weed zapper? And Zasco has a European unit that's very interesting as well. I'm wondering how we could couple that together, and maybe that introduces a whole bunch of new cover crops that we haven't thought of because we can terminate and don't have to mechanically terminate.
That's interesting with the weed zapper to make that. I wonder if the weed zapper could be used to really facilitate the vetch termination, either through just killing it outright earlier or, again, kind of stimulating it earlier into a stressful condition.
Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit with Brian Luck, who's going to talk later. I think there's some opportunities there for us to couple technologies together. We've looked at, we only played with it like one afternoon, but we had a roller on the front of the tractor, then the planter, and then we had a flamer attached to the back of the planter. But can we modify flamers or zappers? I had the question twice presented to me yesterday, once from my friend in Maryland and once from somebody here, about what does the zapper do to the microbial life in the soil? I don't know. I mean, they say nothing, but of course they're selling zappers, so that's what I would expect them to say. But I don't know if it does or doesn't, and they may be accurate, 100% right, and they may be wrong, and I don't know if you're an earthworm. Maybe it's a good day, and they just like that little zip, I don't know. I had a neighbor that had arthritis, and every day he said he went out and grabbed a hold of the little cattle fence because it made him feel good. I don't know. So, but I think there's opportunities there for us to package these technologies that exist. Again, there's only so many research dollars and so many hours, and if somebody has a zapper that wants to partner, or if you get one or your neighbor has one, and just try something. See, observation is really what directed me towards the roller crimper. I think it's what will direct us to in the future is all of you sitting in this room will see something and go, wait a minute, that's pretty cool what happened there. Maybe it only happened once or in one field. How can you translate that to somebody like Erin who can take that and turn it into a research project with technicians to get some data to really make it work? I think we all have to work together and pay attention to what's happening, because collectively there's a lot of experience here and a lot of observation, which is the starting point for all of this.
So I had a point of clarification from something that Erin had said multiple times about the organic no-till, and in the comment that, like, you know, if you're transitioning, I don't know if this is really the best thing to do. And so, like, I guess I'm asking for more clarification because that's where I'm at, is transitioning.
Yeah.
But personally, I've been doing no-till cover crops and have built my organic matter up quite a bit in that time frame. And so, like, I feel that my soil health is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So I just would like further clarification on
Yeah,
that.
and I don't want to be too discouraging. I just don't want to oversell it either, because, like I showed, I mean, anything with any new technique, and there is a learning curve. So it just there takes a bit of finesse, and anytime, and if anyone ever wants to email or ask during the growing season any questions, emailing me is always best, but I'm always happy to try to field questions if you have questions as you're working through this. But it's more of wondering, and I just pose this as a question, and would definitely love to hear other experiences of people that have been earlier in organic, and if this worked or if it didn't work. Just looking at where it's amazing sometimes the variability of rye growth, that it's not just the biomass in terms of numbers or tillers per plant. I go out to some farms and the rye just looks not as vigorous as I would expect. And again, I do question if there's a fertility issue. So I don't think that it can't be done. I just wonder if the system should be tweaked a little bit to account for different soils and different stages of transition. But because it isn't a foolproof system, just want to be cautious that and just aware again that there's risk. And I wouldn't try it. I wouldn't try anything, especially starting out, necessarily on all your acres, because there is a degree of variability. So I guess, and this is my gut feeling, without necessarily a lot of data, so I get nervous making recommendations on gut feelings, but I would just be more apt to try it in a situation like we've done with coming in after a clover or cover crop, after an alfalfa field, putting some compost down. My gut feeling is that we just need to maybe push the rye along a little bit more. So I don't want to be completely dismissive of how this works as a tool through transition, but just, again, I just want more research and observation to understand how we might be able to tweak the system differently. And Jeff, if you have any comments, or I could throw it out to the audience too, of just different experiences in more of the transition phase versus more mature organic land. Has anyone tried this during transition and had success? Dan?
My suggestion is always, as Erin sort of alluded to, is I tell farmers to start with 10%. So if you took 10% of your beans and did this, you're obviously, unless you really, really screwed up, you can't lose that much, and you're going to learn a ton about how the system works on your particular farm with your particular setup. I've seen cases where it's worked very well first time out of the gate, whether it's beginner's luck or what. I know when Dale Much first tried it over at Michigan State, he had 70 bushel beans the first year, not a weed in the field, and he said, by God, I spent the rest of my career trying to replicate that because it really worked great that first year. And I've seen people try it, it didn't work good, and then they go, it doesn't work, and they throw it away. But if you're committed to making it work, you try 10% of your bean ground or your corn ground, and you want to start playing with it, I think that's a good way to start. Dan?
I was just saying, yes, I tried it, but I guess the comment I would make is parallel to this gentleman. In our no-till cover crop system, we've built enough biology up that, for instance, we're down to about 0.6 pounds of N per bushel of corn. So we know we're mineralizing, we got a lot of things happening. We haven't really had an issue with the sluggish rye, I guess, but it's a function of where you're at on the spectrum. If you start off with a field that's been rode hard and put away wet, certainly a little stimulation from some chicken manure would be a great thing.
I think it's really a case-by-case, farm-by-farm decision, but just to, if you're doing more of that, if you're doing a cover crop intensive system already, I think you're just that much further ahead of making organic work and being that much further down with your soil biology may already be there. But if you're looking at more of a traditional no-till corn soybean rotation or corn soybean rotation, no-till that's glyphosate heavy, I think it's going to be more challenging.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All of these systems that we're talking about here, and organic in general, is more management intensive. So if you're a good manager and you're well on your way, you're going to do great at these systems, whether it's the no-till or conventional with tillage with organic. If farmers, and you don't like to point at people, but if they're not good managers to begin with, and they're looking at these systems and saying, oh, this looks easy, all I have to do is plant cover crop and roll it and plant stuff in, I don't have to spray anything, and oh, look at all the money I'm going to make.
Okay, I guess we need to stop.